there's a very good chance that Nestle may actually be one of the worst companies on the entire planet.
Laboring in the blistering heat here as young as 6, slicing the grass with lethal ease.
Two of the world's largest chocolate companies can be held responsible for human rights abuses on cocoa farms in Western Africa.
What if I told you that there's a hidden dark part to Nestle you don't know? These guys are not who we think they are. Over the years, we've been made to adore these guys. I mean, they are one of the world's biggest producers of food, but today they'll be exposed. This video is a journey into the dark world of Nestle, a look behind the curtain at one of the most controversial companies ever. But to understand the story of Nestle, we first need to go back to the man who started it all for him. The rise of Nestle. It all started with the birth of a boy in Frankfurt in 1814. Henry Nestle was the 11th of 14 children and was born into a family of glaciers where the trade of cutting and fitting glass had been passed down from father to son for many generations. But the young child got older and he didn't want anything to do with the family business. He wanted to become a pharmacist instead. His dad didn't like this, but Henry's mind was already made up, and at 15, he started working as a pharmacist apprentice before later leaving his hometown in Germany to go and live in Switzerland, where he worked on concocting medicines and chemical experiments. It was in Switzerland that Henry would start one of the biggest corporations in the world. In fact, to this day, Vive in Switzerland remains the headquarters of Nestle, but it wasn't until much later in his life that Henry started Nestle. Before his big break, Henry tried all kinds of different entrepreneurial ideas, like he started producing and selling liqueur, vinegars, rum, lemonade, and even fertilizers. But none of his business ideas ever seemed to take off. It wasn't until Henry was in his 50s that he finally had his big breakthrough. It all began when Henry read a report that infant mortality had become extremely high because many women couldn't breastfeed their children or their children were allergic to the milk. Henry's entrepreneurial instinct kicked in, and instead of seeing a problem, he saw a big opportunity. There was clearly a major need for an artificial alternative to breastfeeding that could save countless babies' lives, and thus Henry got to work. He began to study all the existing information about breast milk and conduct a series of experiments in his lab with various different ingredients. But saving children's lives wasn't the only thing that pushed Henry day and night to find breast milk substitutes. It was also personal for Henry. Henry's wife had many health issues of her own and was not able to give birth. So as a way to channel her maternal instincts, she became extremely concerned about other people's babies and pushed Henry to create a breast milk substitute that could save lives. And by 1867, he'd succeeded. Henry had created one of the first ever baby formulas, essentially a formulated mixture of cow's milk, flour, and sugar, which could be a substitute to natural breast milk. Henry then created a company called Nestle to begin selling it, and so you see, Nestle started off well. It was just a humble guy creating a life-saving product for babies who couldn't breastfeed naturally. Unfortunately, this isn't a heartwarming success story. If anything, this is a horror movie. The baby killer. When Henry Nestle first created his baby formula back in 1867, the whole idea was a supplement to help mothers who couldn't breastfeed their children. Definitely not to try and replace breast milk altogether. And the reason for that is studies have shown that natural breast milk is healthier than any formula. Natural breast milk is widely recommended by the World Health Organization, American Medical Association, UNICEF, and countless others. So for a while, baby formula was sold simply as an alternative for those who needed it. But in the 1970s, about 100 years after the company kicked off, sales seemed to be slowing down and Nestle got overly ambitious. They wondered how they could sell this baby formula to all mothers, not just those who actually need it. Despite all the other products Nestle had launched, baby formula was still one of Nestle's biggest moneymakers. And that's because it has a very high profit margin. So imagine how much more money they could make if they could expand their market to all mothers. So Nestle devised an evil plan. The plan to undermine breast milk and aggressively advertise their baby formula as being superior. Manipulating mothers into believing Nestle's formula was a necessity for the health of their babies, and that it would be better for their child than breastfeeding. When in reality, the evidence was the opposite. Nestle's formula was vastly inferior to natural milk, as it lacked many of the nutrients that helped babies fight off disease and keep them healthy. by encouraging mothers to switch when they didn't need to. It was putting their babies at a higher risk of infection and malnutrition. The water crisis. In 2005, Nestle did another evil thing. The CEO was of the opinion that having access to water wasn't basic human rights. The media criticized him for this. He later backtracked. But to see how he really feels, we can simply look at Nestle's actions when it comes to water. For example, in Pakistan in 2013, Nestle began diverting clean drinking water away from villages and towns, and then began bottling water in their factories and selling it back to the same people they took the water from, but at a much higher price. The big issue is that Nestle had taken so much water that thousands were forced to drink dirty sludge water instead, because these people couldn't afford to buy the expensive bottled water, which, don't forget, was theirs in the first place. In the midst of this very serious water shortage, Nestle Waters continued to pump 705 million gallons of fresh water from California's national park, draining some of the state's remaining water resources to sell back to Californians. And when asked about this, the Nestle Water CEO said that if he could bottle more of California's water for profit during the drought, he would. Likewise, in Michigan, it was reported Nestle pumped 747 liters of fresh water every minute out of the state reserves. And that Nestle pays only $200 to take 130 million gallons of Michigan's water. Exploitation. When you pick up a chocolate bar, probably the last thing on your mind is how that chocolate bar was made. But the brutal truth is that Nestle has been found to use forced labor and even child slavery on the farms where the cocoa beans are harvested, and for a while this cheap, exploitative labor went mostly unnoticed, leading to low costs and high profits. But then in the year 2000, a report came out that said Nestle was guilty of buying blood chocolates, and unless they was fully aware that enslaved children were working on their plantations. Now this was also true for many of the big chocolate companies. So in the year 2000, Nestle, Cadbury, and Mars all promised to end their chocolate slavery by 2005. Except they didn't, because the years flew by and they kept missing all the deadlines they set. In 2005, the International Labor Rights Fund filed a lawsuit against Nestle and other chocolate manufacturing companies on behalf of 3 million children, alleging the children were trafficked to the Ivory Coast, forced into slavery, and frequently beaten on the chocolate plantation. Nestle's response to incidents like this was always the same. In 2010, a documentary called The Dark Side of Chocolate brought attention to the media about how children were being stolen away from their homes and families were being forced to work on plantations for very little or no money at all. Then an investigation in 2020 discovered that children as young as 8 were picking coffee on the farms of one of Nestle's suppliers. It was reported children work 7 days a week carrying sacks that weigh twice their weight and get paid around $1 an hour for their work. The conflict dated back to the 1970s, when a military regime in Ethiopia seized all the assets of foreign companies and nationalized them. And then many years after this, one of those companies that had its assets seized was acquired by Nestle, who were now demanding compensation. Even though $6 million was nothing to Nestle, they said it was the principle of the matter that was important. However, once the media picked the story up and people started threatening to boycott their sleigh, they immediately did a U-turn and settled the debt for $1.5 million instead, and vowed to reinvest it into the country's economy. But it seems pretty clear, if it wasn't for the potential PR nightmare, they had no intention of backing down. And if you thought Nestle's controversies ended there, think again. In 2012, the Competition Bureau raided the offices of Nestle to investigate price fixing, claiming Nestle was making deals with other chocolate companies to ensure they all kept their prices equally high, so they didn't undercut each other and give customers a better deal. Nestle denied any collusion, but eventually settled for a $9 million settlement the following year. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. See you guys in the next video.